Just go for it. Okay.
Ray,
Uh,
thank you so much for being here today on Drinking with Gin.
you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to talk about this topic anywhere at any time, and as long as you want me to speak about it, you'll have to shut me up in the end.
I
Uh,
highly doubt that. I can talk about this for days myself. It's such a fascinating topic, an important topic. Part of
mm,
why I do this show is because there's so much misinformation out there. And with narcissism having become kind of mainstream, people throw it around really flippantly. And as someone that has been on the receiving end of it, that is really frustrating because there's real damage that's done. Like we talk about CPTSD and the gaslighting and the making you feel like you're going crazy and all of that stuff. And as someone that's experienced it, it's really frustrating when people just like flippantly throw these things around. So that's why I like to bring experts on like you, a psychotherapist. I love having guests from all over the world. And tell us where you are talking to us from today.
okay. Well, I come from London, but I've lived in the north of England. England is tiny compared to America. I live in the north of England, not in a small town called Knaresborough, which is, you may have heard of Harrogate, and it's part of North Yorkshire, the county of North Yorkshire. Um, Yorkshire as a whole is England's biggest county, and that doesn't mean a thing. It's very focused around cities. There's 9 million odd in London, and there's a few people with tending sheep, and a few people like me up here in Yorkshire. Um, so I live in Harrogate. Harrogate is a spa town, so we get lots of visitors up here. If I look out my window to my left here, um, it's not quite the horizon, but I can see for probably a mile or two, and it's just green. If I look in the other direction, I'm about 3 miles from one of the main arteries in the UK, which is the A1, which is it's an M version near me, so it's a motorway standard road, and I can be on that A1 going north or south within a few minutes. So it's a lovely spot. Um, but like I say, I do come from London. I'm a proper East Ender. I live down there. Well, I've lived up here maybe half my life now. Uh,
I
Stop
love
me.
that. No,
Okay.
so I love when people are really proud of where they're from or where they live and they love their
Mhm.
city. That's how I am. I love Minneapolis and I have traveled a lot of places within the US, all over the world. I lived in Southern California for a brief stint for about a year and I couldn't wait to move back to Minneapolis. And I think especially if it's like a little hidden gem that is underrated that people have preconceived misconceptions about,
Mhm.
like it makes it that much more fun. So I love that you're passionate about where you live and where you're from. I think that's beautiful. Now, we do start every episode of Drinking with Gin with what are you drinking? Because we have our conversations over a chat. Are you drinking anything with us today while we're talking?
Yeah, I'm drinking water.
Okay.
Um, it's 3 in the afternoon here, so it's a bit early for me to get anything stronger than that.
Well, and it's the
Um,
morning here for me, so I'm drinking sparkling water. We've got a little. Yeah,
okay.
so we're on the same page, which is totally fine. And that's what it's funny. It's like when people ask about this show, they're like, drinking with gin, is it about alcohol? No, it's not about drinking at all. And there's a whole story behind the name that we don't need to get into today. But I want to tell people how I found you because it's funny. You have a massive following on social media, and I am going to link your stuff in the show notes so that people can come find you and follow you because I
Thank you.
love your content. It is so relatable. Um it resonates with me every time I see it. But how I initially found you was from a funny post. And while narcissism and this topic is very serious, especially for the people that have been victims and on the receiving end of it, sometimes I love that we can still have some lighthearted conversations and find some funnies, find some humor within things. And how I originally found you is from a post that you had shared that said, "Hey, did you know that narcissist spelled backwards is asshole?" And then it said, hey, if they can make stuff up, so can we. And that one just got me. And I was like, I love this guy. I'm following you. And then, just after following your content and looking at some of your resources that you have available, I was like, oh man, he'd be perfect. I hope he says yes. So thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
Okay, so what I want to talk about, people love lists. And you have this incredible list on your website of 15 behaviors that are most common in narcissists. So I want to talk about them.
Okay.
And before we do, I kind of told you this before we started chatting. Um,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe I should wait. I'm deciding. No, let's do it right now. So, one
Sure.
thing that I've been starting to see come up, and it's not something that I see in textbooks, it's not something that I see commonly. I've been seeing it in my own personal experiences, and I've seen it just mentioned here and there by certain professionals, experts on this topic, is there's a behavior and a technique that I've been starting to see when narcissists fake ignorance when they're being held accountable for something.
Yes.
Can you tell
It's
us about that?
I can try. Okay. So one of the things that you don't see in textbooks, or I'll put it in let's flip that coin over. What you do see in textbook is lists. The types of narcissists you might come up. They could be grandiose, they could be covert, they could be overt, they could be malignant. My experience over 20 years as a therapist working with the victims and survivors is that a narcissist can flip from one topic to another in an instant. Their overriding feature is to get their own way. So they can be covert narcissists, what I call the little old lady type narcissist. I have one in my family. And she plays the victim. Oh, she is just brilliant at playing the victim. And you fall for it. Excuse me. And unfortunately for her, I don't. But I've seen other members of the family and I've said to them, what are you doing? Why did you just do that? Because they were asked, and this little old lady who sits in her house and controls people, she can flip to becoming the nastiest, vicious fishwife of a language in an instant if she's not getting her own way.
Mm-hmm.
So my feeling has always been the same. Just to step back a little bit, we talk very often about narcissistic personality disorder, NPD. 99% of the narcissists you are likely to, or anyone else is likely to come up against, are not diagnosable. NPD is very similar to BPD, borderline personality disorder, and it comes under, in the UK, certainly, it comes under the same cluster, they call cluster B of psychiatric disorder. Because we get it all from the APA anyway, so it's a very American thing. But I've coined my own phrase to deal with the people, the other 99%. And I call them behavioral narcissists because they've learned in childhood and in teenage years, possibly too, that to bully people is the answer to life. They get their own way when they bully people. Now, that may be their own trauma. It may be what I would call a priori second-hand trauma, seeing father beat mother, coercive behavior, nasty individuals. They may have watched it. It may not necessarily have been subject to it. But this child creates an image that they have the answer to life and the meaning of everything by bullying people. Whereas the rest of us create what we call a triad. We create a view of ourselves and our future and the world around us. And I would call that a triad of development. So very often, behavioral narcissists that you come across are nastily vicious in several different ways, and we can talk about that. But they're nasty. But when you break down the behaviors, when you break down the way they look at the world, you're actually dealing with a teenager. You learn that you have a naughty teenager in your house. Suddenly, they ain't so vicious. And so I'm a great believer in the covert and overt, but I'm also a great believer that they mix in an instant. So it's not about a major and a minor, it's an everything.
Well, and it's almost like, and I don't know if you would agree with this statement, but it's almost like whatever is most convenient for them.
Yeah.
At that time. And that kind of leads to the first thing on your checklist of these, this list of 15 behaviors of narcissism is that everything is about them.
And always will be.
Yeah.
We can go into it a little deeper and say there are no morals. And, as a therapist, I don't judge people's morals because my morals might be different to theirs. But I don't judge people on what, so, if there's affairs or there's all sorts of things that go on in human nature, I don't make the judgment. But a narcissist, a behavioral narcissist, will make that judgment. They are superior. They need several things because their personality is not constructed internally and externally like the rest of us that create this triad. They create their personality purely in the environment, because what happens when they suddenly realize that to get your own way in the world is to bully people, what their development, their internal development, their cognition, their understanding of the world around them either curtails or it stops altogether. So you might have a 6'6" man that's 17 stone bully in a man's body that will force his partner to do whatever he wants them to do. But he has the mind of a 14-year-old. That's the way I look at it.
Well, and sometimes they even have, like, I know I've had other psychotherapists and psychologists on that call, like when they don't get their way and they can't control other people and bully them into decisions, then they have almost like a toddler temper tantrum.
Well, we call it a rage according to the textbooks. Yes, but that's exactly what they do. If you think about it and follow it through, they're throwing the tantrum of a young teenager who's not getting his own way and hasn't cleaned his room. And that is what happens. And it's not necessarily intimate relationships. It's like I've already said, there is a member in my family that I have control of simply because by force of personality, and that I can read them.
And that is the worst kind of person for a narcissist to encounter, when you see right through the strategies, the tactics, the behaviors, the manipulation. I mean, that's so frustrating for them. And I'm surprised that she hasn't just altogether discarded you.
She has, more or less.
Oh, okay.
But you see, they have no family of their own. They had no children. So she's very much bleeds into my children and my grandchildren. I've got 2 daughters and 3 grandchildren.
Oh.
And she desperately needs that adoration that she doesn't get from me or the rest of my generation. There is a cousin, a male cousin I'm quite close to, very close to, and she don't get it from him either. But my children and my grandchildren, they're a bit easier meat.
Yeah. They don't have the awareness yet.
We're getting there.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're getting there. They're independent people. They can, I'm here to pick up the mistakes and make them better. I'm not here to prevent them happening. That's not my role as a parent. And it's a strange circumstance. I have to say 90% of what I do is intimate relationships.
Okay.
And once you can discard the possibility of physical violence, I don't know what the figures are like in the US. They're much greater than here even. But here, 2 women a week are murdered by their partners. And we don't hear about most of it. We see it in the statistics, a year later. But about 100 women a year are murdered by their partners. That's outrageous. So once we've got that little bit out of the way, once I can say to a client, I think you're not unsafe, never sure, then we can start to deal with taking the control back. And really, if you think through the idea of a 14-year-old tantrum, it's actually really quite easy to control. It's like a kid in a supermarket that wants a particular brand of soap powder that you don't buy, and they throw a tantrum. The best way to stop that child throwing a tantrum ever again is to throw one yourself.
Oh.
Throw yourself on the floor and kick your arms and legs in the air, and they will be so embarrassed they will never do it again.
That's an interesting take. I don't know if I could bring myself to do that, but but I'm laughing.
It's not easy to do. But if you've
idea.
tried everything else, if you've tried walking away, if you've tried negotiation, if you tried being firm, none of it will work, because what you're doing is you're reinforcing the fact that they get your attention when they do something you don't want them to do.
Yeah, it's like that idea of any attention, even if it's bad attention, is attention,
Absolutely.
right? And that's why we see toddlers and kids and teenagers repeating, like if an adult laughs at something, even if it was bad behavior, then they keep doing it to get that same reaction.
It's what's called a positive reinforcement.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so you talked about that you primarily work with romantic relationships, right? Like partnerships. And so one of the next thing on this list of 15 things is love bombing. And love bombing is something that's become really mainstream. I mean, it was even on Ted Lasso, right? So that's like a good reference. They talked about
wonderful, wasn't it?
yeah, I love that show. So that was interesting, right? To see them talking about love bombing when I forget their names at the moment, but there was a conversation about it, and I was like, oh, this is fascinating. We need to have a conversation about what it really is. So do you have any specific takes or like a unique way that you look at love bombing?
It's so difficult because I'm usually the one picking up the pieces with the victim. Yes, I can tell you that if a relationship at the start of a relationship feels too good to be true, then it is. Run. Don't walk, run. But we've all been there. I've been in that sort of relationship too. Long time ago now. But it is love bombing. They are so good at attracting you that what they do is they understand that if you're built socially constructed, there's the two things. We were talking about rage just before. They see any minor altercation or threat as a major issue because there's nothing inside. So that's why they come out fighting. When it's love bombing, they can actually hide their real selves for a period of time, and they will match your perfect partner. They will probably move it too quickly. They will declare undying devotion, within a few weeks. They will overbuy, where you're expecting a little present, it will be something huge and lavish and expensive. It's a sort almost like a foot in the door technique. So they continue to bomb until they've worked out who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And when they don't, and they also need to hook you in to this fantasy that you fall for. And once you've fallen for it, they don't need to behave badly anymore. They can just be themselves, because behaving like love bombing is bad behavior to them. It's not them at all. It's very, very difficult for them to maintain it. So I reversed the adjective. It's bad behavior to them. You think it's perfect.
Mm.
And you
That's
fall in love with this fantasy, but they can't keep it going.
No, so it's like a short period of time. They can't keep up that, because a lot of times narcissists actually are very financially irresponsible,
Yeah.
because they are trying to put on this front, right? Like that they have this amazing life, they're traveling, they're buying these expensive gifts, doing the lavish concerts, expensive dinners, in the courtship that they can't afford and keep up with. And so it's kind of that, it's always hiding that piece of it while putting on the show. And one of the things that you said is until they kind of trick you into falling in love with them. And I always want to make sure to mention this because I've had comments on my social media when I talk about my experience, and one guy had commented, "I hate to break it to you, but you're not very smart." And he spelled "your" wrong. So I just corrected and put the right way to spell "your" in that instance. Um, don't come
Yeah.
at me. I will correct
They
your
can't,
grammar,
they
sir.
can't, their grammar and spelling is usually appalling, isn't it?
I love it. That's just like, it was me being a little petty. But that said, I think a lot of times people are like, "Oh, you're stupid." Narcissists go after dumb people, and that's a farce. They go after highly intelligent, successful people
Absolutely.
because that tends to elevate their image. And so I always like, that is one of the biggest things that I want to get across to people that have encountered this, that have
Mm,
encountered narcissists, that have been on the receiving end of this. You're not dumb.
mm,
And I can't reiterate that enough.
mm. I think you're absolutely right. The idea that a narcissist would waste their breath on somebody that is dumb is beyond. They just wouldn't do it. First of all, there's no fun. It's easy.
Mm.
That's the end result that they want before they move on. They want a challenge. They are so convinced that they are perfect that somebody that is dumb is no challenge. They want successful, attractive people. One of the things you were talking about, we were talking about lavish gifts. Very often, even in that early stage of love bombing, they will buy you gifts that you pay for. I wish I had £1, $1.20 for every time that I heard that.
Tell
Oh,
me more about that. How,
well,
like, can you give an example of how that would play out?
a recent example is a very intelligent young woman who was actually a clinical psychologist in New York, and we were working together for a good few weeks. We went into months, and she started to tell me about the first holiday she had with this now ex. And she said he took us to somewhere really expensive, beyond the expensive of Florida. It was worth, it was more. She said, and then when it came to the last moment, he told her that he was short of money. So she said, no problem. I'll pay for it.
Hmm. How many
And
times?
he used that in an argument as if he paid for it.
Oh, one of my favorite things, and this is, I don't know if this is part of like a textbook thing. This is textbook with my ex that I share about in my first book, You're My Favorite.
Mm.
But he is notorious for always having fraud on his credit card. His credit card gets declined, and then, oh, Mike, it had fraud last week. It must not. I'm like, I've never met someone that has had fraud so much on their credit card. And then that's a way, like you said, to get someone else to pay for it. So that's something that had completely slipped my mind from my own experience, because there's other
Yeah.
things that were so much bigger
Yes.
than having to pick up the tab for the hotel or the dinner, or you name it,
Yes.
for
Yeah.
everything. Okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this before, so this is number 3 on your list, split personalities, how they
Mm.
can kind of flip. And
Yeah.
sometimes, and maybe this is part of what this means, of the split personalities, is sometimes we hear them described by other people that you might introduce them to. Oh, they're so charming. They were so nice. They put on this front to other
Mm.
people, but then your experience with them might be very different. And so you kind of see almost 2 completely different presentations.
Mm. At least 2. Um, like I've said, there is no major in a type of narcissist. Essentially, the world is about them. They've worked very hard to do their best to stabilize a really quite shaky personality, ego, um, completely environmentally. And whilst we were growing up, we balanced what other people told us about us and the world, and what was going on around us, balanced that with our internal thought process, so that we establish ultimately our place in the world. And that can be very unsure for an awful lot of people, um, especially people that lack confidence in life. And there's certain personality types that will go in the direction of helping others before themselves. Um, but just consider for a moment the personality type that creates themselves entirely in the environment around them. They are going to be expert. They're going to join committees. They're going to do charity work. They're going to be everybody's friend. They will do favors for people, but they will claim back 20 times over when they feel the need to. And what you have to realize is that these people around this narcissistic individual will support them because they don't know any better. So that when you say to your friend, I'm having a bad time because of X or Y, they go, I don't believe you. He's lovely, or she's lovely. 3/4 are he. And they don't believe you. They become enablers. I'm sure you've heard the phrase flying monkey.
Yeah.
Of course, it comes from the Wizard of Oz, doesn't it? The Witched Wick of the West had monkeys that were flying. Went to do her bad bidding, and and that's where it comes from. So they can actually control people remotely,
Hmm.
but they need to know where you are. And of course, tracking these days is very easy. I'm working with a client actually in the UK at the moment whose narcissistic partner will text one word. If she's out somewhere, maybe lunch with a friend or a girlfriend, or a couple of there's a crowd or whatever, and he'll text one word, show. And she has to take a selfie and send it to him.
Wow.
Uh, and that is the power of remote coercive behavior.
Mm.
Of course, in the UK, we have laws against it, but you don't in the US. We even have laws or post-separation coercive behavior. So there's far more protection in the UK. And when I'm asked a question almost daily on Instagram, a private message that says they're doing this, the first question is, are you in the UK? Because
Mhm.
in the UK, I go to the police.
Well, and I
Because
think that's one of the things that's so frustrating about narcissism is it is psychological, mental, emotional abuse, but just because they're not hitting you,
yes.
then it's not abuse. And I
Mm,
think that's one of the most frustrating things. I've talked about that. I've had a former FBI agent, Joe Navarro, on before, and he's
mm,
like, that is one of the most frustrating things in the US, right? Like that there's no hotline, to be
no,
like, am I actually going crazy? To have people to talk to. It's like seeking out therapy and finding education around it.
mhm,
Um, that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And then the next thing on your list is lack of boundaries. And I want to I think what's interesting is narcissists are known to be boundary busters, right? Like if you have a boundary, they will break it. But I think what's interesting is people that are a great target for narcissists are people that lack boundaries, that don't, that are the people pleasers, that want to make everybody around them happy. They'll, do whatever. And so
mm,
that one's like a tricky one because it kind of plays onto both parties in the situation.
mm. Boundaries are funny things. Yeah, yeah, I can be treating a lady that is what I would call a captain of industry, has a good business. Um, it doesn't matter what it is, but a good business individual, good business brain. Um, but they come home and they are abused, either coerced, physically abused, sexually abused by their partner. Now, there is a thing that we always let our intimate relationships under our guard. But I usually describe this, and I say to the person like this, if you went into a shop to buy something small, and the person behind the counter was a quarter of the rudeness of your partner, you would rip their head off. Why don't you do that at home? They have the skill, but intimate relationships get under our guard. And it's not just men that will die at the foot of a woman. It's both, it's a two-way street. And women will do the same and die at the feet of a man that they are in love with.
Hmm.
And if that is not reciprocal, then you have an abusive relationship. We all go into relationships with compromise. But when only one side ultimately is the only one side that compromises, that's abuse.
That's a really fascinating perspective. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And that actually leads right into the next one. And this is a big warning that I often give my coaching clients and, to talk about it for you it's number 5 that you're isolated. And
Mm-hmm,
that is a huge thing. Like, do not isolate yourself. You have to have a network because you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, where if you are isolating yourself and you're not talking about the things that are actually going on and happening, then when you do finally talk about it, people might not believe you.
mm-hmm.
And you kind of lose that support system.
What happens is with a narcissistic relationship is that they will continually attempt to shrink the circle. What I mean is we go into a relationship and we have different friends. I've got friends going back an awfully long time that I still occasionally see. I got a message on Facebook from a guy that we used to go on holiday at 17 and 18, he was part of the crowd. And he said to me, "Where were you when I got married to this bitch?" It was a private message. And I wrote back and went and said, you didn't invite me to the wedding. If he'd have invited me to the wedding, I'd have spotted it. I probably wouldn't have said anything, but whenever he's come in trouble, and that's with all my old friends, I'm seeing a guy at the moment that is probably one of the toughest men I have ever seen. And he is so whipped by his second marriage that he doesn't know who he is anymore.
Mm.
He just knew enough to reach out to me. Remembered enough of himself. Yes, it's exactly what they do. They will break you down. And I often talk to my clients about what I call T-1, which is the day the trauma started -1 day. You were there. You were there. That was the person you are. And it is still in there because it doesn't disappear. It just gets buried. So we have to dig it up.
Mm-hmm.
But we dig it up in light of experience. So you're actually better than that one by the time we've redug it. And that is a very big principle. But what they do is they shrink the circle. And when they can't control you, when they feel like they're losing control, they will attempt to control the people around you, what's left of them. My ex-wife married a narcissist, far more powerful than her. And she actually when she was interviewed through a court case, she said, my husband has never liked my children. And she accepted that.
Mm.
And that is absolutely blows me away. And that I find so often, that you will choose your partner over your children. I've never known it to be the right thing.
Yeah.
It's okay. I'm sitting here, Captain Hindsight. I can see it all from here. And you can't see it. And most of our decisions in life, we don't make decisions knowing that they are wrong. We occasionally slip off that moral plate. Sometimes we all do that occasionally. But most of the time we make decisions in life for ourselves and those that are close to us based on the idea that we're doing the right thing at that moment. And it is only hindsight that can tell you it's wrong. So shrinking the circle is a massive thing. They will do where they can't control, they will remove. And I've known people to give up everything for that one person. And that's a strange thing because that's almost the definition of addiction. Because an addiction is giving up everything for one thing.
Yeah.
Curing addiction is giving up one thing for everything. And I've just almost got to that definition without even trying.
Well, and I love that you didn't name this, but what I heard you say is, that T-1, and then oftentimes you see these clients that you're working with come out even better on the other side. That's that post-traumatic growth.
Yes.
And that's such a beautiful thing. Like, I definitely have experienced that. And I think this is how I relate it as someone that's been in that position, kind of how I describe it is, I was in there all along.
Mm-hmm.
I was always there, but it's getting to that level of knowing yourself, loving yourself enough to be that person that you've always been. And that takes a lot of work. Like it does. It takes time. It takes acknowledging it, recognizing it, seeing it for what it is, and shutting out the external noise, being vulnerable, being authentic. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, but I loved that you kind of touched on that as well.
Well, we all need to be the best we can be for ourselves before we can be the best for anybody else. And so often, the people that are trapped in narcissistic relationships or come out of them, have lost sight of that. because they've been told so often. How often do you need to be told that you're selfish for wanting something? It can be anything minor, but if you're told you're selfish, how often do you need to be told that before you believe it?
Mm-hmm.
For me, selfish is not necessarily a derogatory term. I feel I'm selfish. I give 100% attention, like I'm giving you right now. My phones are off. I can't hear anything except I'm listening to you. I've got my iPad onto my website here, but that's it. And that's where I'm focused. But outside of that, I make sure I'm okay. And,
Mm-hmm.
I give anything for the health of my family. But that's me too.
Yeah.
So you must put yourself first. It's not even if you call it a selfish act, it's not a derogatory term.
Yeah. And partly, especially with women, I work a lot with women, and it's something that I see really often. And it's not really related to narcissism per se. But I see women who put all of their time and energy into their husband and their kids. And then the kids leave the house. The marriage starts to suffer because they've lost sight of who they are. They don't even know what they like to do anymore. Or say maybe they don't have kids, or even if they do, they put everything and all of their identity into their title at work. And then they
Mm,
retire or they lose their job. And now
mm,
they've completely lost that one thing that they've tied their identity to. And you know,
mm.
they're not achieving peace, enlightenment, joy, love, and life, which are like the high vibrating emotions and where we want to more consistently be. And I just, and I think especially if we're dealing with being in relationships with narcissists, that can get amplified.
Absolutely. There's a couple of things I want to say to that. Firstly, I'm a great believer in what I call the 80-20 rule. I'm not a numbers person. You should see my accountancy support. They despair with me sometimes. Um, but there's an 80-20 rule that if your relationship is 80% good, you hold 20% of yourself back. You don't put 100% of yourself into an 80% relationship. And if you have an 80-20 relationship, you've done well. That's cool. I do like that. The other thing I want to say is it's very difficult when you are being bludgeoned by someone that believes you are inferior, because that's what a narcissist will think, um, who have no morals. It's very difficult to think of yourself. But one of the little key things that I learned some years ago, and I can't even remember who said it to me, but it was said to me personally by somebody. Don't let the joy of every moment pass you by.
Mm.
And when I take that breath, that little pause before I respond to something that might be difficult, might be fantastic, it doesn't matter what it is. When I take that breath, that gives me the joy of that moment. And when you are subjected to narcissistic abuse, you lose that if you ever had it.
Would you say that you're often in like a fight or flight kind of mode? Like you're kind of always trying to figure things out. You're kind of analyzing the behavior, making, it's like that walking on eggshells, trying to make sure, keep things smooth. And so you lose so much focus on yourself because you're always kind of navigating the dynamics of this
Yes.
relationship and this other person.
Yeah, absolutely. The one of my criteria is if you are ever concerned about the response of your partner, you aren't in love. That's not a loving relationship. Um, Eggshells, that's just the beginning. Because what it does is it breaks down the personality. Coming back to the gaslighting, It was originally a play and then a film in the 1930s. And what it was that the husband was trying to get the wife to believe she was mad, and their house was lit by gas. And he used to turn it down very low and say to her that it's too bright in here. So he was trying to get her to think she was mad. Gaslighting is a wider view of things now, and that is whatever breaks down the victim's personality, whether it is an outright lie, like it's too bright in here when it isn't, or it's one of the several little tricks that they do to confuse or deny the truth that actually happened. What they're doing is they're engaging the emotion. And one of the things I do, the first things I do with all of my clients is where I talk about removing a lot of the emotion. You know, I'm one of these people that I've gone through life, and a lot of the time, life appears indifferent to me. I have my passions. You should see me watching football. Uh, but I'm talking about soccer in your language. Um, but there's often an indifference about me, and I allow things to happen around me, even within the companies that I own. I allow things to happen because they are very important to the person that's doing it. And if it doesn't tread on the spirit of the company or my personal feelings, then it will run. I'm indifferent to it.
So so indifferent to me means like that you don't care. It's so, and maybe because I also, after my experience, I say that I started to approach things more from a place of neutrality.
Hmm.
I feel like we're probably saying the same
I think
thing.
we're saying the same thing.
Yeah,
I think
that's fascinating. I love those.
indifference to me is not caring. It is indifference to me means not inputting emotion
Okay, I like
or
that.
measuring the amount of emotion you input.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, because like I kind of made that shift for myself where I was like,
Yeah.
and also you said if you are worried about how the other person is going to react or,
Mm,
I think that applies to all relationships. I had a friendship like that. I had a family relationship like that where it was always that like that anxiousness of like, oh my gosh, how are they going to respond? They're going to blow up on the other, end of this conversation because they're not going to get their way. You're either, establishing a boundary. And the other thing that you mentioned, and I use this a lot in coaching, is you should never leave a conversation or an argument feeling confused. That is not normal. That is
mm,
exactly where a narcissist wants you. And if it doesn't make sense, it's
mm.
nonsense.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Unfortunately, what we tend to do, and we're using the same language in a different way, or a different language in the same way, that I'm not quite sure which. The, the indifference to me isn't not caring, it's measuring how much import there is. Some people have emotion on a switch. So they're either not emotional or they flick the switch and they're full in. That's the wrong way to be. For me, emotion is a continuum
mm,
and you can regulate. And the more you do towards the end of the scale, the happier life is.
yeah.
Fortunately, what happens in a narcissistic relationship is you are bludgeoned into emotional response. And one of the ways I try to teach my clients is not to respond. Now, there's something quite famous out there called grey rock, which is a very Americanism that doesn't fit very well in proper English, but I get the meaning of it. And I tend to help my clients, not by calling it grey rock, but by calling it remove a lot of the emotion. Remove 80% of the emotion. Client I'm working with at the moment, this guy that's come to me over a number of years, has been a professional musician. He has gold discs. He's a proper top of the tree. Um, and his current wife, and he said to me, he texted me last night and he said, she's in the kitchen cooking and she's singing at the top of her voice because she knows he's a singer. He teaches singing. He's made God knows how many records, gold discs, all sorts of things, his background. Um, he said, I don't, and I'm trying not to lose my temper. And I said, where's temper come in? Go stand next to her and sing. And he wrote back and he went, I don't understand. And I went, just sing. And he texted me about an hour later. He went, I feel better for that. Because once he started singing, he didn't think about her. He was thinking about his singing. The other alternative is I could have said to him as leave the house, go sit in the car, go for a walk, do something, go and have a workout at the gym, do something that you don't hear it. So he can either remove the emotion or become part of it. And the speciality, the way I work is getting my client to make those judgments. Pick your fights, if you like. I've recently finished working with a lady in New Zealand, which really threw out my body clock because they were 11 hours in front.
Mm-hmm.
And she was no way she was going to remove herself from the family. They had a big farm with God knows how many more sheep than we have people in England, and she was never going to leave that. So I taught her where to pick her fights, and he was a real covert, whiny type of little old man. And I said, well, pick your fight with him. She said, he doesn't like me. I like to go to the gym every morning. And I said, well, go to the gym every morning. So he said, well, he's up so early. He's, oh, darling, you going to the gym? Well, you know. So I said to her, either get up before he's awake or let him whine and go anyway. But don't respond to him. That's the 20%. And within a few weeks, he'd stopped whining at her to go to the gym because it wasn't doing any good. He wasn't stopping her.
Yeah, he wasn't controlling the behavior. She gained control of the situation.
But she didn't do it by confrontation.
Right.
She did it, I suppose, if you like, by grey rock. She just didn't engage it, walked away.
Gray Rock method does work. I did do an episode on
Oh,
it, covered
absolutely
it
does.
in
Yeah,
season 1. You just become uninteresting to them, right? Because what they're trying to do is get a reaction out of you. They're trying to get you to be emotional so that they can tell you that you're emotional and being crazy,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And this is also, it can be related to not just romantic relationships. I've had this experience. I've gray rocked a couple of friends out of my life. And it
Mm,
is so rewarding where I did used to have that anxious feeling of like, oh my gosh, if I say this, how are they going to respond? They're going to blow up. This is going to be a big deal and it shouldn't be. And then once I gray rocked, I just became uninteresting. I stopped sharing information about what was going on in my life. And oh
mm,
man, does that drive them crazy. They want
mm,
all of the information. Like I was going to Paris and I had talked to this friend the day before I was going to Paris. I didn't tell her that I was going on a trip to Paris. And she
mm.
saw that I was in Paris on social media and oh, it made her just go great. Like it made her go insane. So stopping sharing information, stopping,
That's-
engaging in the fight, like it really does work because now there's nothing for them to glob onto to get a reaction, to control you. And so, but I like that kind of how you shifted that perspective of like you either, remove yourself or you join in, you know,
Join in.
in the emotion.
Because the one thing they don't expect you to do is either remove yourself or join in.
Yeah.
They expect to fight.
Yeah. You have to
So
shift the dynamic.
I think we're talking the same language.
Yeah. Okay, well, Ray, I think I was a little bit overzealous thinking that we would get through your whole list of 15. I think
Yeah.
we've gotten through 5. Um,
Five, yeah, something
5.
like that.
And there's so many. I mean, we know that they lack empathy. We know the delusions of grandeur, the anger, the inability to let you in, the avoiding responsibility, which we did touch on. Can you tell us a little bit about, this is not one that I've ever talked about here, and I think this would be a fun one too, because it's funny sounding, and I think it's just interesting. You have on here the green-eyed monster.
I knew
What
you were
is
going to
that?
say that.
Tell us.
Narcissists love power.
Mm,
It's about the only thing they love. Most narcissists know more law than the police. They know more law than the lawyer. They know more medicine than the doctor. They are the font of all knowledge. If you, their victim, does anything that they can't do or they cannot better, you are in for a proper fight. Because what it does, it comes back to the same thing almost in every occasion. It comes back to their shaky personality, their ego. I'm using the Freudian word because that's my upbringing. Their ego is so flaked. Fragile is the right word. Fragile is the word I'm looking for. That they are likely to see anything that nothing to do with them at all. That you may suddenly decide you want to have guitar lessons and what they will do is that you will hit the button by doing that because it damages their perspective of their life and how important they are. I can remember going back years ago when I was lecturing. I used to lecture, I loved it, on what was called in the UK an access course. So it was people that would return anything from 20 upwards, even into the 60s. People that wanted to go back into education and get a degree. Maybe they used to turn up and say, I want to be a nurse. Go, well, we need to send them to get maths and English. And then they have to have a diploma that gets them into university, that qualifies them to apply. And I used to teach them that. I loved it. And I had stories. I can remember one woman. I used to have to open the windows and the doors when I was teaching because she'd have a hot flush and that would, so she must have been late 40s, early 50s. She was in the menopause and bless her, she was lovely. And she used to tell us, she came in one day in tears. Her partner had smashed her laptop.
mm,
And it just so happened I had a spare one that the college had given me, and I was using my own MacBook. And I gave it to her. And she'd recount stories like she'd be sitting at the dining table studying, and he'd be sitting his backside on the chair watching something on the daytime television. And he'd go, make me a cup of tea. And she'd leave her study and go and make him tea and bring it to him. And he used to hide her books and all this sort of thing. And she didn't do too well in the first year. In fact, it was only a 1-year course, but she stayed on for a second year because she failed some of the things because she couldn't study. But she came to the presentation evening and she used to say to me, oh, he's a hell's angel. And, he leather waistcoat and, like the hair everywhere, beard. And she introduced me to, after the presentation, she introduced me, and I shook hands with this guy, and he had a handshake like a wet fish,
Mm.
and I've got quite a strong grip. Um, and I held his hand tightly, and I looked at her, and I looked at him, and I went, "Is this what you're worried about? This thing?" And he daren't say anything. And she did her second year and went on to get a degree in law. And she left him, by the way. But he was a nobody. He was just a bully that had nothing substantial. And that epitomizes narcissism for me.
Yeah.
They're all bluster. There is nothing behind them. And so once the victim recognizes that, that's easy. You can control a teenager.
Yeah. That's fast. And it kind of circles back to what we started talking about at the beginning of that everything's about them. And if it's not, that it ties
Mm.
back to them being kind of that teenager. Um, okay. I am going to link your website with this list that people can go and read all of the ones. And we did cover a lot of them, even though we didn't necessarily go through the list. We did talk about gaslighting and manipulation and
Yeah.
a lot of the things in here. But just for the sake of time, I could talk to you for days about this topic. You're such a wealth of knowledge. And I'm going to link your social media, your website, so that people can go find you, find this list, find out more information. And you work with people from all over the world.
Anywhere. I sit here in my little house in North York. Well, it's a big house by English standards. Um, I sit here I have 27-inch iMac. I've got a MacBook Pro there. I've got an iPad, and my phone's turned away from me while we're talking. And I have everything I need here.
And people can just book sessions with you right
Yeah.
through your website.
The
Wonderful.
thing I'd like to mention while we're still live is there's lots of writing of how my opinion about narcissism coming out on Patreon very soon. So by all means, follow the website, follow the social media, and there's a link tree in there somewhere. It will be coming within the next month.
I'm very excited about that.
Good. I'm pleased.
Yeah. So
It's
we'll make
taken a
sure to
lot
share
of
that.
work.
We'll
Yeah.
make sure to share that, and we'll keep up to date on your stuff. And then I'll even share it on my social media as well when that comes out for your Patreon for people to go find that. Because that's fascinating. Your compassion for the people that have been victims of narcissists, your wealth of knowledge and information on NPD. And I actually love how you talk about it in a different way, behavioral narcissism, because it's a scale, right? And like you said, it's so hard to diagnose these people because they're not seeking treatment. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with them, right? Like,
No,
why do they?
exactly.
It's the only disease where everybody around them ends up in therapy except for them, the person that actually
Yes.
needs it, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I just want to say thank you for your generosity and your time, your wealth of
Well,
knowledge, and being here and sharing your wisdom with us today.
you're welcome. Anytime.
Appreciate it.
Okay.